Today we're going to be working on the air conditioning system of a 2005 Chrysler Town & Country Touring 3.8 liter stow and go. I've got another video out there showing how we replace the rear AC core for the air conditioner along with the expansion valve and extension tubes. So today we're going to be evacuating the system and re-adding the R134A charge. The low pressure side schrader valve is down here beside the alternator, and the high pressure one is up here. For this job you're going to need a vacuum pump. You're going to need an air conditioning gauge set. In my case you're going to need one of these attachments to go to a 12-ounce refrigerant can. Ideally I would have had an attachment that screwed onto the can, pierced it, and then connected to the center yellow hose here, but Harbor Freight at this time does not have that. They have this nice kit, but they don't sell that simple little attachment. You'll see why that's important coming up here in a little bit. You'll also need some PAG oil that is specific to the brand of car and compressor that you have. In this case, for a Chrysler, it's PAG 46. There's also another name for the same thing. It's the OEM number. At the front of the car there's some information you need to know about your AC system. It'll tell you the number of pounds of R134A that you need, and it also mentions the PAG oil number here as ND8, which is the same thing as PAG 46. With this van I've got the rear AC, so it'll be a dual unit, and for that there is 2.38 pounds of refrigerant. 2.38 pounds is 38 ounces. That'd be just a little over 3 of these cans. There are some guidelines out there about how much PAG oil you should add back in after the occurrence of various different events. In this case, I didn't really lose a lot of oil, so I'm only going to add back in a couple of ounces. Also, specific to this vehicle, I have added some oil in the past when I did a recharge. Each of the 3 hoses has a different end on each end. One is simply a threaded end, which is the one on the right here, and the other one has the little stinger inside that's going to depress the schrader valve. So you need to be careful on the orientation of each of these hoses. The gauge set comes with a quick reference guide to help you get those hoses on the right direction. For working on automotive AC, this gauge set comes with some attachments that allow you to attach to your quick connect schrader valves. If you are working on residential AC, then the fitting itself would just screw right on to whatever came out of the pipes there. But for automotive stuff you need these attachments. In my situation, this plug here on the vacuum pump is a different size than the yellow hose. This fitting on the yellow hose is too big. So be careful of that, and there might be an attachment fitting you can get there. Here's a can tap. That's what you're going to need to attach your typical 12-ounce can of R134A to your center yellow hose on your gauge set. This end here is going to screw onto your can. Once you get it screwed all the way on, you're going to turn this handle. That's going to drive a little pin out the bottom here. pierce the can. Then once you unscrew this top knob, it will allow refrigerant to flow out this port here, which connects to your yellow hose on your gauge set. Inside here you can see the pin is now fully depressed, or fully in the out position, which if this were screwed onto the can, it would have pierced that center portion. On the bottom of these 12-ounce cans there's basically a rupture disc, that little half moon shaped cut. If you would happen to over pressurize this can by accidentally opening the high pressure gauge while you're charging, basically this little piece of metal here would give way and all the refrigerant would shoot out the bottom. Not something you want to do, but it's better than exploding this can into shrapnel. An optional way to fill your system back up would be to use one of these reusable fill hoses. Basically, when you screw this onto the can, it pierces the top of the can, and then you connect this quick connect to your port on your AC system, low side, and then when you squeeze this trigger, it's going to let refrigerant come out here. There's also a gauge on here that tells you basically when you're at the right level of fill. If you didn't have the can tap to connect to your center yellow hose on your gauge set, then like I said, you could use this method here for filling your system. I like to put just a drop of refrigerant oil down inside here on that green gasket, just so that when it hits the can it slides instead of grabs, kind of like you do when you lubricate the gasket on an oil filter before you spin it on. Your typical vacuum pump will come with a small 1/4 inch flare fitting here for your connection. Some pumps, like the ones you might buy at Harbor Freight, they might come with dual ports, one for the R22, which is the smaller, and one for the R134A, which is the bigger one. In this case, you have this vacuum pump and you take your yellow center hose and you try and connect it on there, and it just slides over the top of the fitting. In that case, you can get one of these adapters. This will screw onto the vacuum pump, and then from there you can screw your yellow hose onto that fitting and you'll be ready to go. I bought a tiny little measuring cup to measure out my PAG oil. My wife doesn't like it when I use her dishes to work on my projects, and especially when I use her sink to clean off some parts and stuff like that. So this little fitting has, ounces on it, 0 to 2 ounces, so we'll go from there. This particular vacuum pump has a valve here that opens and closes the connection here, so you'll want that in the open position. Another thing you want to be careful of on the vacuum pump is that you've got oil in there. You can see the oil line here, so we're in good shape. This also has a gauge on it, but we're going to be using the gauges on the gauge set. We're going to start by connecting the high and low pressure hoses from the gauge set to the schrader valves on the automobile. In this case, these have a knob on them. You'll want to screw this knob all the way out on your high side and your low side. Take off your dust caps. Snap these on. Once they're on, you're going to turn this in. That depresses the schrader valve and basically opens your connection through here. You're going to want to start with these two valves fully closed. I've got the high and low side quick connectors onto the ports on the high side and the low side, and I've turned this knob to drive the pin down and engage and open the schrader valve there. I have just a tiny bit of pressure in the system. I'm going to turn on the vacuum pump, then I'm going to come back and open these two valves, doesn't really matter in which order, and that's going to start pulling vacuum out of the red hose and the blue hose and evacuating the entire system. Vacuum pump's running. Starting to pull the vacuum. Again, both these are open. FYI, these on the side, those are just there to connect your hoses for storage. Same with this one right here. Okay, I pretty quickly pulled it down to close to 30 inches of mercury. We're going to let it sit here for about 15 minutes and pull a vacuum. That's to try and get any moisture out of the system. The vacuum pump's been running for 15 minutes now. No surprise, but we're still holding vacuum here. The big test is coming up here in a minute. We're going to want to close both valves, no particular order. Once both valves are closed, go ahead and we'll shut the vacuum pump off. And what we're going to do now is carefully note where the needle is at on the gauge. And it's basically just a freckle shy of 30. So we're going to let this thing sit here for about 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, if this hasn't moved at all, we're in great shape. So we'll come back in 30 minutes. While we're waiting that 30 minutes, we'll talk a little bit about how a gauge set actually works. As I mentioned earlier, these on the side, those are just kind of dummy plugs, so you can plug your hoses in there for storage. Same with this one here in the center. Basically, you've got three chambers inside of this block. You've got the center chamber connected to the yellow hose, the high pressure chamber connected to the red hose, low pressure chamber connected to the blue hose here. These valves, they do not shut off the gauge, they don't shut off this hose. Basically, this chamber, the gauge goes straight through to this hose. This red valve shuts off this chamber's access to the center chamber. Same over here. This gauge is connected directly to this blue hose. This valve simply shuts off this chamber's access to the center chamber. So now with these two valves closed, the gauges are reading exactly the vacuum or the pressure that's in the red and the blue hose, but neither side has access to this center hose. So theoretically, I could take this off right now. Wouldn't have any impact on this. Okay, it's been 30 minutes now and no perceivable change in the vacuum, so that's a good sign. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start the vacuum pump, open both these valves in no particular order, and let it run for about another 45 minutes to completely pull all the moisture out of the system. Alright, now we're going to let it run for about another 45 minutes. Want to get it good and dry. The vacuum pump's been running for over 45 minutes now. So what we're going to do next is We're going to close both of these valves, isolating that center hose that's connected to the vacuum pump. I've been checking periodically and we're still running down here at minus 30 or 30 inches of mercury there. Now with both these valves closed, we can go ahead and shut off the vacuum pump. Now the next step is to add some PAG 46 oil into the system. The way we're going to do that is we're going to fill up this yellow tube full of oil, get it reconnected to the gauge set, and this other end over here we're going to stick this tiny little funnel in there, and then we're going to use that measuring cup. There it is. We're going to use this little measuring cup to pour in the rest of about 2 ounces, so a little more than 2, something in that range. This isn't the world's greatest way to do it, but here I'm basically taking this little funnel and slowly filling this tube with oil, and it's starting to drip out the bottom end now. So I'm getting pretty close to full. Okay, I'm getting a pretty good stream of oil out the bottom end. So now I lift this other tube up to the same height. Get my funnel filled up. Attach this to the center connection on the gauge set. And now we have a vacuum in the system. So if I cracked open one or the other of these valves on the gauge set, it's going to open up the path from the center hose to whichever side I crack the valve on. I'm going to put the oil in the high side because I don't want it ever going into the compressor. The funnel's pretty full here. I'm going to just barely crack this high side gauge, and it's starting to suck it in there. And I'm just going to keep filling it here. Another simpler way to have added that oil charge would have been to have bought a can of oil charge mixed in with a little bit of refrigerant, and then you could have connected that to this yellow hose and fed it into the system. Now you'll notice since we've added the oil into the system, we let some air back in there, so we're going to have to run the vacuum pump for probably another 15 or 20 minutes to pull a good vacuum on it. Then we'll start adding the refrigerant. So we're going to start with these valves completely closed, yellow line connected to the gauge set and the vacuum pump. Turn the vacuum pump on. I'm going to open the low side first. Maybe pull a little bit of that oil in that direction. Now I'm going to go ahead and crack open the high side. We're pulling the vacuum again, let it pull down for another 15 minutes or so. Alright, after adding the oil, we've run the vacuum pump for about another 15 minutes. Going to go ahead and close these 2 valves. still pulling a good vacuum. Go ahead and shut off the vacuum pump. Now I'm going to do something a little different. Since I already have a can here that I partially put in at one time and it's just sitting here, I want to go ahead and use this one first. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off my low side connector down here, unscrew the knob first, undo the quick connect, get that off. Go ahead and put this bottle in, and then we'll go for the next bottle using the can tap and feeding it in through the center yellow hose through the gauge set. While this was still connected to the port on the AC system, I cranked this valve all the way out, which pulls in that pin, lets the schrader valve close, then popped open this quick connect, pulled this one off. Now I'm going to grab my can here and put this can into the system. Should suck it right in because right now we've got a vacuum in there. At this point, since I've removed the low pressure side from the car, this gauge now reads basically 0 because this hose has now been open to the atmosphere. That doesn't mean that I don't still have a vacuum in there. I do, as you can see here. Again, by closing this blue valve, I've isolated this blue hose from the center connection and thus from the high pressure side. So right now the high pressure side is connected to the AC system and it shows I still have a vacuum in there, but the blue line has been open to the atmosphere, so it's basically 0. As I squeeze the trigger on the can here, I can notice that the high side gauge is starting to go up a little bit. I can still hear the can hissing, so we're still putting pressure into the system. I put about as much of that can in there as it will take. The system's basically equalized now. The pressure inside the system's the same as the pressure inside the can, so we're not sucking any more in. I'm at about a little over 25 pounds of pressure. So now to get any more of that can into the system, I'm going to have to start the engine. I'm going to go ahead and start the car, see if the compressor will kick on, drop the low side pressure down a little bit, and then we'll be able to get the rest of that can in there. Again, that's a can, one of these. So after we get this one in here, we'll go back to the normal method of using the can tap and putting it on the end of the hose, which is what you would have probably done. I just happen to have that one can sitting around that I wanted to get rid of. I've got the engine running, air conditioner on, fan on, squeezing the trigger, shaking the can. I can feel the can's getting cold when I shake it, so I know I'm still putting some Freon in. Getting pretty close to empty, but got a little ways to go. Got a little pressure in there now. We've got just a little bit of pressure on the high side. Low side we can't pay any attention to because we've got it disconnected right now. I'm going to keep working on that can until I get it emptied. If you notice, the outer dial on this gauge is adjustable. And you want to do that depending on the temperature that you're working in, room temperature. This gauge goes from basically 65 up to about 90, so the range is going to be lower in pressure if the temperature you're working in is cool. And if it's 90 degrees outside, the pressure is going to be higher. So the temperature should be in the range between the two outside red lines, and the center line has an arrow that you point to the proper temperature. We've got as much of this can in there as we can get in there, so now we're going to start adding them through the can tap. Based on the sticker under the hood here, we've got the dual unit, and that means we're going to take about 2.38 pounds of refrigerant, which is 38 ounces, which is a little over 3 12-ounce cans. Okay, we're going to install our can tap on a new can of R134A. We want to have this valve backed all the way out so that this pin is pulled up inside. I like to put just a dab of oil on here to kind of lubricate it when you screw this on. So go ahead and put a dab of oil on there, screw the can tap on. I've reinstalled my low side hose to the port to the schrader valve, turned the knob to open the schrader valve. I still have both of these knobs closed. So right now I'm reading, should be the same on either side, so about 70 on the low side, and then over here should be basically 70 as well. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and attach this can to the end of the yellow line. Now that it's attached, we're going to run this all the way down, pierce the top of that can. Okay, it's pierced. Now we open it back up. That will allow pressure into the yellow line. Now what we want to do is come up here to the gauge and just very carefully loosen this fitting until we hear some refrigerant come out. That's basically bleeding the line, getting all the air out of it. Now that I have the can tap on there, I want to make very, very sure that this valve on the high pressure side is closed. You do not want to let the high pressure from the high pressure side get through here and back down and explode this can and cause this rupture disc down here to fail. If you want to be very careful at this point, you could just take the high pressure side off, but for now just make sure it's closed. I'm going to open the low pressure side, go start the vehicle, turn the AC on. Vehicle's running. I heard the compressor kick on, shake the can a little bit. It's getting cold, so I know I am moving some refrigerant into the system. I will just start to fill the system. Hopefully pretty soon we'll see that compressor start to cycle. Pressure's creeping up. Still shaking this can, waiting for the compressor to pump this down. At this point we've got that first partial can in there, and then basically this is our first can through the yellow tube. This one's basically empty. It's not getting cold anymore. It doesn't feel very heavy at all, so nothing sloshing around. So this one's basically done. Alright, this can's done. We want to change cans, so we want to go ahead and shut this valve. That blocks off. Nothing from this blue line can come over here and go down the yellow line. That's blocked off here in a second. As I mentioned earlier, you do not want to open this valve at any point while you've got a can connected down here. Last thing you want to do is let this 100 psi come through here and go down here and blow up this can. Okay, at this point you can go ahead and close this valve, screw on the next can. You need to be aware that these cans don't get completely empty. At this point there's probably about 25 psi worth of pressure in here. So undo this slowly and it'll hiss out a little bit. Open the handle all the way back to suck in the needle, the piercing point. Screw the bottle on there, run it all the way down, back up to open it. We'll bleed the line, we'll put in the second bottle. Second bottle's on and open. Go ahead and bleed that just a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and open this low side valve. The can is now in line with the system. Basically, you want to hold this can upright. When it gets down to the very end, if you want to tip it upside down a little bit, it's not really going to hurt anything. But basically, just keep shaking it. I'm waiting to see this low side start to cycle here pretty soon. Okay, we're at the point where we've got that partial can in there, one full can put in. Now I took most of this can in there, and now I'm starting to see the compressor kick off and on. So right now we've probably got about 2.5 cans in there. We need a little over 3. We'll see how it goes. Gonna keep shaking this one for a while. We'll decide if we want to go ahead and put that another can in there. At this point, there is cold air coming out from the ducts inside the car, both front and back. This second full can is empty now. We do have cold air coming out. I did see this cycling a bit ago, but at this point, we're going to go ahead and close this valve. This one's still closed. At this point, the blue hose is reading to the blue gauge. The red hose is reading to the red gauge, but neither hose can get back through to this center yellow hose. So at this point, I can carefully shut this valve and then remove this can and decide if I'm going to put in the third full can or not. At this point, we put in the 2 full cans and then a partial can. We're looking for a little over 3 cans. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to put in part of a remaining can, and then this one seems to be able to sit around for quite a while with a can still on it and hold it in there, so I'll keep some in this can for if I leak any out. It is actually November here. It's cold outside. We're not cycling here right now. Usually this, you'd want it to go up to 40 and then it should kick on and come down, do the cycle thing. Maybe when I add the third can, we'll get that process started. But for now, I'm going to disconnect on my gauge set and just put the remaining can in with this little unit here. Today it's a little bit warmer outside, about 65 degrees, which is about the minimum that you want for doing refrigeration work. Today I adjusted this dial so that that arrow points to 65 Fahrenheit. Took the low side dust cap off, squeezed in a partial can, so now we should be at about the 38 ounces in there. With the windows open and the fan on high, we were running at about 30 pounds of low side pressure. If I would close the windows, turn the fans down, we'd start to see the compressor cycle, which means we're probably in about the right area for fill. You want to have your AC on recirculate. We stuck a little thermostat in the ductwork here. I've got the fan down just so you can hear me. But basically, we've got a good temperature there at around 43 degrees or so. When we've got the fans on high,